Ladies and gentlemen, an initial U.S. intelligence assessment concluded that last weekend's American airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities only delayed Tehran's nuclear program by a few months. According to Britain's Reuters, this assessment was issued by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, the Pentagon's primary intelligence organization and one of 16 U.S. intelligence agencies. Citing three sources, the DIA determined that Iran could restore its nuclear program within months. One source emphasized that Iran could restart the program as soon as 1 to 2 months. This classified document starkly contradicts earlier statements by President Donald Trump and other senior U.S. officials, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hedges. At that time, President Trump and many U.S. officials asserted that the airstrikes, using bunker-buster bombs and other weapons, had essentially eliminated Iran's nuclear program. A U.S. official who reviewed the DIA's assessment noted that the document is cautionary and hypothetical and said a detailed report will be released in the coming days or weeks. Some analysts say that relying solely on satellite imagery may not fully or accurately assess the damage to Fordo's uranium enrichment facility, which lies deep underground. Evaluating the damage at Iran's Fordo site is considered difficult and involves multiple agencies. The Defense Intelligence Agency is not the only one assigned to this task. One source indicated the initial assessment lacked absolute consensus and sparked internal debate. According to an anonymous U.S. official, Washington still does not have a clear picture of the true extent of the damage from last weekend's strikes. Nevertheless, the DIA's early estimate suggests the airstrikes may not have been as successful as the administration claimed. According to the Washington Post, some centrifuges used for uranium enrichment remain intact. The Pentagon rejects the notion that the damage was insignificant, though it acknowledges the DIA's classified assessment exists. Secretary of Defense Pete Hedges stated, "Based on everything we've seen, and I've seen it all, our bombing campaign completely destroyed Iran's nuclear weapon production capability. Our massive bombs hit every target precisely, and the operation was flawless. Anyone saying the bombs didn't cause significant damage is just trying to undermine the president and tarnish this successful campaign." However, one source noted that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium has not yet been eliminated. David Albright, a former UN nuclear inspector, assessed from commercial satellite imagery that he believes the U.S. strikes destroyed Iran's current uranium enrichment facilities, but did not eliminate the long-term threat. On June 24th, President Trump retracted earlier statements about regime change in Iran after facing mixed reactions from supporters of the Make America Great Again movement. Asked whether he wanted regime change in Iran, the president replied simply, "No," adding he wants things to calm down as soon as possible. He told reporters aboard Air Force One en route to the NATO summit in the Netherlands, "Regime change would lead to chaos, which ideally we don't want, so we'll wait and see. Iran has some very good business people. They're savvy, and they have a lot of oil. They should be okay. They can rebuild and do very well. They will never have a nuclear weapon. But apart from that, they should do well, as I've said for years." Before departing the White House, the president criticized both Israel and Iran for continuing overnight hostilities despite the ceasefire conditions he had announced a day earlier. On June 22nd, President Trump had hinted that regime change in Iran was possible and hinted at potential direct U.S. involvement in Iran's internal affairs following the nuclear strikes. He gave the campaign a striking name: Make Iran Great Again. He posted on social media that although using the term regime change might be politically sensitive, if the current regime in Iran doesn't make Iran great again, why not have regime change? The surprise strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities shocked some MAGA supporters. Trump had campaigned on avoiding deep foreign entanglement, even though the administration signaled the military action would stop there. But when Trump hinted at possible regime change, concerns grew among his base that America could become mired in a prolonged Middle Eastern conflict. Within the Republican Party, differing views emerged. Some warned that entangling in the Middle East could hurt the party's prospects in next year's midterms. On June 23rd, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt sought to calm the situation by walking back the president's Truth Social post, saying he only meant that the Iranian people might want a new government, not that the U.S. intended to pursue regime change or escalate militarily. At Trump's behest, on June 24th, dozens of Israeli fighter jets that had entered Iranian airspace awaiting orders to strike were ordered to turn back. According to Sky News, this display of military force was abruptly halted after a key phone call between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. Sources indicate the U.S. president urged Netanyahu to stand down to avoid broader regional escalation. Within hours, Israeli jets returned to base, underscoring the delicate balance between military power and diplomacy. Still, one Israeli fighter jet carried out a lone bombing, dropping a symbolic rather than strategic bomb on an Iranian target. According to the Times of Israel, the jet struck an Iranian radar installation north of Tehran, a move meant to demonstrate Israel's readiness without triggering full-scale conflict. This latest Israeli action followed accusations that Iran violated the ceasefire declared just hours earlier. Israeli sources claimed Iran had launched 2 ballistic missiles into Israeli territory a few hours after the U.S. declared ceasefire took effect, something President Trump described as possibly a stray missile. On June 13th, amid escalation between Israel and Iran, Israeli forces targeted senior military leaders, nuclear scientists, uranium enrichment sites, and ballistic missile infrastructure in Tehran. Iran's health ministry reported at least 606 dead and 5,332 injured since the Israeli strikes began. June 23rd was Iran's deadliest day, with 107 killed. 95% of deaths occurred on the spot. By Tuesday, both Iran and Israel claimed victory as a U.S.-brokered ceasefire temporarily halted nearly 2 weeks of unprecedented conflict. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Trump for America's historic involvement, saying, "We have never had a better friend in the White House." He also claimed that just hours before the ceasefire, West Jerusalem had carried out the most devastating strike on Tehran in 50 years. Meanwhile, large-scale celebrations took place across Iran on June 24th to mark what state media called a victory over Israel, with major festivities held at Tehran's Revolution Square. State media emphasized that the triumph was due to Iranian unity and significant military progress. CNN quoted Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, saying Israel would respect the ceasefire as long as Iran did so as well. He added that he had informed U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and thanked President Trump for deciding to act with Israel against Iran. Iranian President Majid Pezeshkian stated his country is ready to resolve issues with the U.S. In a call with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Pezeshkian said he welcomed any support from friendly nations. The incident coincided with Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan's emergency trip to Doha, Qatar, to meet fellow GCC foreign ministers, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, to discuss Iran's attack on a U.S. military base in Qatar the previous Monday. President Trump announced a ceasefire on the evening of June 23rd, calling on both sides to comply. The conflict began on June 13th, when Israel launched a series of strikes it claimed were aimed at preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Tehran denied pursuing a military nuclear program. In response, Iran launched missile and drone strikes at U.S. forces. On June 22nd, the U.S. entered the conflict by striking 3 Iranian nuclear sites, including uranium enrichment facilities at Natanz and Fordo. In retaliation, Iran fired missiles at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar the following day. U.S. officials reported no casualties. Trump stated no Americans were hurt, and there was almost no damage to the base. The conflict has jeopardized nuclear talks that resumed earlier this year, with Oman acting as mediator, which Iran suspended indefinitely after the Israeli strikes. According to Iran's health ministry, Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 430 civilians and wounded more than 3,500. Israeli officials reported 25 dead and over 2,500 wounded. Title: Iran still sustains its nuclear program after Israel's strikes. Ladies and gentlemen, one fact observers must acknowledge: Iran was once a name that made the Middle East tremble at the phrase nuclear capability. Yet following a series of semi-public, semi-covert Israeli strikes, from scientist assassinations and cyber attacks to mysterious explosions at nuclear facilities, the big question remains: does Iran still have what it takes to pursue its nuclear dream? Today's analysis takes a deep dive into Iran's present condition, its capabilities, cohesion, and realistic limits after these near-miss attacks. To understand why Iran continues to pursue its nuclear program despite the high cost, we must look back over more than half a century where technology, ideology, national identity, and strategic uncertainty intersect. Iran's nuclear program didn't begin in crisis. It began in cooperation. In the 1950s, under the US-led Atoms for Peace initiative, Iran was once a close ally and received technical help to build a civil nuclear research infrastructure. Iran's first research reactor in Tehran comes from that era. But everything changed after 1979, when Iran adopted a new form of government and international relations became complicated. Under sanctions, technological isolation, and economic pressure, Iran quietly advanced its nuclear effort, this time with clearer motivations: energy independence and strategic defense. It's not just about nuclear power. Iran has vast oil and gas reserves, so energy shortages have never convinced the international community. Instead, the nuclear program symbolizes technological mastery, national sovereignty, and self-reliance in an uncertain world. In a region bristling with modern strategic weapons, Iran's pursuit of technological parity is understandable from a national security standpoint. From 2002, when secret enrichment plants at Natanz and Arak were exposed, Iran's nuclear program came into international focus. Concern mounted that Iran might pursue nuclear weapons, even as Tehran insisted its nuclear efforts were peaceful. What followed was over 2 decades of diplomatic engagement, sanctions, negotiations, and the 2015 nuclear deal, which itself later unraveled amid geopolitical shifts. Iran gradually increased its uranium enrichment to levels approaching weaponization, now at 60% purity, far above the civilian standard of 3.5%, though still below the 90% weapons threshold. This places Iran within technical reach if it decides to go further. But that's theory. In practice, Israel's covert campaigns have degraded both equipment and morale. Advanced centrifuges were destroyed or eroded, critical supply lines severed. Under tight sanctions, rebuilding complex parts or systems is extremely difficult. Iran had to rely on older, less efficient centrifuges, slowing progress. Personnel was also a major vulnerability. Targeted assassinations and security concerns created gaps in expertise. Training a new generation of nuclear scientists in a safe, trusted environment takes time. Time Iran lacks. Moreover, key sites like Natanz and Fordow have been repeatedly sabotaged, forcing decentralization and deeper underground relocation, again, safer but slower. Economic strain compounds the issue. Nuclear R&D requires significant investment at a time when Iran is grappling with inflation, unemployment, and social pressures. Political divisions further complicate Iran's path. Hardliners view the nuclear program as essential state sovereignty. Moderates favor diplomacy to ease sanctions. This internal tug-of-war results in hesitant progress. So, despite covert damage, Iran retains the skeletal framework of its nuclear infrastructure, but many muscles have atrophied. Bridging the gap from 60% enriched uranium to a deployable nuclear weapon requires not just material, but advanced design, precise detonation technology, miniaturization, and delivery systems. Decades-long expertise that advanced nations spent generations developing. Iran has been localizing some technologies under sanctions, but a true weapons program demands a fully integrated system, real-world testing, and iteration. Strategically, Iran stands at a crossroads. A nuclear weapon would provide deterrence in a hostile neighborhood, but the consequences, preemptive strikes, deepened sanctions, diplomatic isolation, could be severe. Regional neighbors, fearing proliferation, might follow suit. The risk of a Middle Eastern nuclear arms race would skyrocket. Some analysts argue Iran's goal is not to build a bomb, but to get close enough to leverage internationally, to deter adversaries, and to gain bargaining power, without tipping the balance into full weaponization. This threshold strategy is like keeping a finger on the nuclear button without pressing it, retaining capability without triggering a crisis. It allows Iran to stay strategically nimble, close enough to threaten, but not cross the line that provokes a major backlash. The nuclear dream isn't dead, but it's no longer a straight line. Iran is sustaining a latent capability, weakened but viable. The key asset is not necessarily a bomb. It's the belief that Iran could build one swiftly if needed. Through covert attacks, Iran's program has paid a heavy price in time, resources, and strategic credibility. Yet ironically, Iran may not need an actual weapon. Just cultivate enough uncertainty that others believe it might. In a nuclear chess game, the power lies in perceived potential, not actual warheads. And in that respect, Iran, despite everything, still retains a fragile but formidable position. Will the future be a nuclearized Middle East or a new diplomatic settlement? That answer remains held in Tehran's undecided hands.